All right, we're actually going to have two lessons in one today. Had two shorter subjects from Proverbs I wanted to touch on, but neither one was quite long enough for a full lesson, and I didn't think it'd be right to only teach for half an hour. So you're going to get try to do two in one here. Starting off, just thinking about age. I would describe our cultural view as generally idolizing youth. It is the desired thing. You know, the cool people are the young people. And there is a general dread of old age. And, you know, and some of that we see just the desire to look young. And, you know, the products that are out there, not just, you know, dye your hair, remove your wrinkles, and if the products don't work, use always surgery so that you can look like you're plastic and old, but consider it young. And there's as y'all have already said, but the culture does not view old age as desirable. And Jim, really talking about the biblical view, really did a good job of summarizing what Proverbs actually says, is there is honor in old age. There are dangers in youth, but there's also honor in youth. And so I would say the Bible takes, obviously, the most realistic view, especially when you bring in, for example, Ecclesiastes 12, and the description of someone, you know, towards the very end of their life, and the weakness, the physical weakness of old age. It doesn't shy away from it. And it describes it in vivid terms, vivid poetic terms. But the Bible takes a very realistic view. And Proverbs really summarizes, I would say, the wise man, in this case Solomon, teaching us wisdom, sees youth as a state to be grown out of. Not to be disrespected and dismissed as unimportant, but to be grown out of because of the tendency towards simplicity and folly. However, Proverbs does not insist that old age by itself is honorable. But rather, what Proverbs teaches is wise old age is honorable. So let's walk through this relatively quickly here, starting in Proverbs 20, verse 29. The glory of young men is their strength, and the splendor of old men is their gray head. What kind of proverb is this? Yeah, it is contrasting. You're exactly right. And exactly right, there's not a but, there's an and. But in this case, that and establishes the contrast so that we are seeing young men versus old men. First category of people in the first line is who? Young men. Well, the second category in the second line is old men. So what it starts off, the subject of the first sentence is what? Glory. So it's talking about this. This is certainly a good thing that Solomon is pointing to. He's not speaking of this in a negative at all. He's saying there is a glory of youth. What is the glory of youth? It's their strength. Here, the glory is their strength. And we recognize this. It's common knowledge to everybody. As you get older, your physical strength begins to decline. And so there is a limit, you know, within our lifespan of the ability to do certain kinds of physical, laborious activities. And so he's saying there is a glory here, and it is their physical strength. I think we recognize it as physical strength. The second line then, what is the subject of the second line? Splendor. And what is it that is splendid? The gray head. So does our culture view the gray hair that way? No, not at all. It seems to be pretty significantly wired into us, is that we don't view gray hair as a splendid thing. But Solomon absolutely says this is, you see the gray hair. It's not something to dread. It's not ugly. It's splendid. So as we're looking at the comparisons here, we have two comparisons that are essentially the same, essentially synonymous with one another. What are the 2 points of comparison that are essentially the same? The glory and the splendor. So he is, equating in the same way that strength is glorious for the young men, gray hair is glorious for the old, or splendid. So we can interchange in those two words. So we can say the splendor of young men is their strength, the glory of old men is their gray head. And then you have, of course, young men and old men is just, we would say, opposite there. And then the other point of contrast are not really, synonyms together. They're not opposite to one another. It's two different aspects of life: strength and then gray hair. And I wouldn't say they're mutually exclusive. That's by no means what Solomon is saying. And obviously, as Jim has reminded us, some people, when they get older, go bald. Does that mean they have no splendor or glory? So again, as we're thinking through the Proverbs, we recognize these are general principles, and they are in this case, very specific statements, teaching general truths. So some of what we learn from this, some of the principles we learn from this, is each season of life has its glories. There is advantages and disadvantages to both. So just restate the first line: the vitality of youth is splendid. We certainly should not look down on young people and say, well, they've got too much energy. I know we all probably come in a time, I wish I had that much energy anymore. It is something that is noteworthy and rightly praised. Gray hair is not to be despised. And this is, again, the one that we need in our culture more than the vitality of youth, understanding the glory of the vitality of youth. We recognize there is great value in the gray hair. It is its own glory. Now, I don't know that you would rightly say, therefore, you should not dye your hair. But I do think, actually, this proverb leads us away from that and saying, I don't need to. It doesn't, at the very least, it doesn't matter. It's because gray hair has its glory. And this is where the vividness of this particular proverb comes in, because the idea of the splendor, as I said, is something beautiful, and it harkens back to a crown. So that the head of the aged is crowned with the glory of the gray hair. You can think of that next time you see a commercial for hair dyes. This is what Solomon is saying, is that their age has its crown. It's visible to everybody you meet. And it's a glorious crown. It's one, again, not to be despised, but it's one to value. So what are some applications from this one? How do we apply that to our lives? Do not demean youth. Do not despise old age, but rather enjoy the benefits of each season of life. And so we're not looking back on youth and saying, I wish I had all of that, and consequently despising our old age. I mean, Ann's question there, can I be 25 with what I've learned along the way? We want the benefits of both. And that's not the way that God's made the world. And so we enjoy the benefits of each season of life. We may look back fondly and with praise to God for the enjoyment that we've had in the other seasons of life. We can even look ahead and praise God for the benefits that may yet be coming in our life. And ideally, we're still learning wisdom. So at the very least, there'd be more benefit of more wisdom. And so we simply view age as something that is good, whatever the age is. It has its benefit and we enjoy it. There are specific challenges. So having said all of that, as we think of our culture and the tendency to be fascinated and to prefer youth, Proverbs indicates to us that the young man needs knowledge. He doesn't know what he needs to know. And often we know they don't even know they don't know. And there is a need of true biblical knowledge. And so we're not just talking about, experience with the world and more understanding of how things operate and how the real world is. That may all be true, but in the context of Proverbs, there is a deep need of knowledge. I know more about the Bible now than I did when I was 20 and in Bible college. Because I've had nearly 30 years of learning more about the Bible. And the only way you get an increase of knowledge is time. That's it. We're never able to just download everything we need to know. I plug a USB into my skull and overnight everything is downloaded and I wake up the next day and I know everything. That doesn't work. It takes time. It takes time to learn it. And we're talking about this particular kind of knowledge in Proverbs. It's not just factual knowledge, it's experiential knowledge. So that's something that I have lived with, have worked out in my life. So it's the difference between going to a mechanics class and learning how to replace a transmission and then replacing a transmission. I have the knowledge. I can maybe even tell you the steps, but it's not the same kind of knowledge as I'll have when I've done it. And again, that simply takes time. And as we take these Proverbs and apply them to our life, as you're reading them and as ones are showing up in your life and you're saying, that's significant. I needed that this week, or I need that. I know a situation where I should be applying that. And hopefully you're taking those, you're meditating on them, you're working through how do I apply this, so that you're doing some of this work that we're doing here each Sunday afternoon, and you're studying it out, thinking through what is it teaching, how does it apply, and you might even be able to come up with a list of 3 or 4 things. Say, I need to do this, I need to respond this way, I need to stop doing this, and you have the knowledge. This kind of knowledge that Proverbs is talking about is that which then does it. That you have the experience of doing it. You've worked it out in your life. You've begun to work out the bugs. Because everything looks really good on paper and then it meets reality. And you find out I didn't account for everything. I overlooked something. They didn't respond the way I expected them to, or just nothing worked right. Every once in a while we have those. I thought it was going to be this and it was something completely different. And all of this process takes time. And so the fact of the matter is, the challenge of youth is they've not had enough time to gain the knowledge. Directly related with that is there's a need of discretion, prudence. I think this is a New King James word. Now we're moving into the ability to really use this knowledge and to use it well in their lives. And then the last one, Proverbs 7:7 points us to the need of understanding. So I think we're moving up in the levels. I have the knowledge, I'm beginning to work it out. The discretion is the experience in it. And so that now I've learned better how this knowledge really works out. So it's not just I've done it once, I've done it 10 times. I've done it 20 times. I'm learning more about it and learning more about how it applies. And I'm able to see that not every situation needs exactly the same response. It's a discretion of being able to sort through the right response, the biblical response in different situations. And then the understanding, I would say, is a real mastery of it. the ability to carefully and skillfully navigate through the challenges of life. If you remember very early in this study, I talked about this word understanding and how it is used in other places to describe somebody sailing a ship. The man, the helmsman, standing there at the tiller, steering the ship through the hazards, steering it safely into the harbor. It's a skilled pilot who knows what he is facing, knows what he has under his control, knows what is coming up, and is able to properly navigate without ending up in a shipwreck. And the challenge of youth is they don't have this knowledge. They're growing in it. And so there's knowledge there, but they don't have it developed as they should, as they can eventually. As a result, the discretion there, the ability to use that knowledge is limited. And generally speaking, there's not quite the mastery. There is some mastery. I'm not saying that they're completely incompetent in all things, but the skill is not where it can be in years to come. The mastery is not there yet. We know this in just really any skilled craft. Somebody that is just learning it, they're just learning it. They're not going to be skilled. Even if they are very talented, they're not going to be skilled. They work at it for several years. They're growing in their skill. But many times, I would say most times, it's going to take a decade and more, depending on what we're dealing with, to really become expert in it. And we talk about wisdom, it is a skill to become expert in. And the challenge of youth is simply they've not had the time. Hopefully they will have the time and apply themselves well. Then we have one other proverb to look at related to this. Proverbs 16:31, the silver-haired head is a crown of glory if it is found in the way of righteousness. In the first line, what's the subject? What's he talking about in the first line? The head is described, as Jim's already said, as silver-haired. So we're talking again about the gray head. And how does he describe this head? Crown of glory. So we're talking the same basic information we've already talked about. Back in, I know it comes after this one. I'm taking them in reverse order of what they're found in the book. But it's the same information what we're talking about in Proverbs 20:29. And we now have this gray hair that's a crown of glory. And as we're reading and studying the Proverbs, we also have to remember we have to connect them to one another. And so he didn't say everything about the gray hair and the crown of glory, the splendor of the gray head in Proverbs 20:29. He now tells us something else about it. And that there is a condition to the gloriousness. That's what that if tells us, is there's a condition here. And we know he's still talking about that head because of that word it. It's pointing back to head there. So if the silver-haired head is found where? In the way of righteousness. Yeah, it is the way you live your life. It's the course of your life, the habits of your life. It is this character, the character you possess. This idea of way, it's an inclusive idea of how you live your life. Every facet of it, the entirety of your life. And so that now he's talking about what kind of way? A way of righteousness. So it's actually talking about a life of righteousness. And reminds you that the importance of this word way. He starts off, the first 9 chapters, he is calling the reader, calling the youth, very specifically the youth, to choose the right way, to choose the way of wisdom, to reject the way of folly. Do you remember, as we've studied through this this wisdom and folly, and we talked about the significance of it. What is the moral synonym of folly? So he uses a word in Proverbs that you should read as, oh, that is folly. Wickedness. What is the moral synonym of wisdom? Righteousness. And so as you're reading through and thinking about this, don't separate righteousness in Proverbs from wisdom in Proverbs. So we can say the silver-haired head is a crown of glory if it is found in the way of wisdom. Obviously, he chooses the word righteousness for a very specific reason. He wants us to think in moral terms, not just terms of skill in living, but in righteous living. So what we are talking about, what Solomon is teaching us, again, as we've already seen, gray hair is not shameful. We cannot, and this is important as we're thinking through our own lives. It just, time on the earth does not equal greater wisdom. It just doesn't happen that way. Wisdom is not just something that comes to you automatically. Solomon has already told us to seek after wisdom, to pursue it, to search for it, to dig for it like it's a treasure at the bottom of a mine, to invest ourselves in it. And so we cannot assume simply because we're old or older that we are necessarily wise or even wiser. And I think we might all be able to think of individuals that at least we are aware of who seem to have become more foolish as they have aged, not less foolish. The righteous elder, though, is worthy of honor. Again, this silver-haired head is a crown of glory. The one who is righteous, who is older, is worthy of our honor. Righteousness in old age is to be desired and pursued. And we touched on this quite a while back now, but talking about how we gain in wisdom is something, again, we work after. And we're specifically instructed in Proverbs to learn, to start developing wisdom now that we may be wise in our old age. And so that this is something that we have to not only desire, but to seek after. And I'm using old age at this point just mean anything older than we are currently. And I know some of you would qualify as old. I'll let you decide if you qualify as old or not. I'm not going to go there. So we're talking just simply about older than we currently are. And Proverbs calls us to work now to be righteous and wise so that you will have it when you're old. So, in fact, that's the first application. Walk in the way of righteousness in your youth so you will be found in it when you are old. I think one of the most enlightening things that I've ever done on a regular basis is nursing home visitation. And for several years, Ruth and I and others would go into various nursing homes and would go room to room and sing for people and maybe read scriptures and pray with them. We'd just do kind of a generic visiting through the nursing home. And then we've also made a lot of visits and just as we get to know people or people in the church in the nursing home. And you see people, as of course they're declining in strength. They're declining often mentally. And one of the things that's very, very, very enlightening is you go into somebody's room or begin speaking with somebody, they don't remember anything. And, so that there are visits we make and still, visits that I make and go in and say, I am. I tell them who I am and where I'm from. And even though they've seen me, they've known me for years, but the mind is gone. And yet, those things they've learned in their youth many times remain. You begin to sing an old hymn. I don't, Ruth does. Begins to sing an old hymn. And you watch them, they don't know what's going on at times and have no idea where they are or seemingly who we are, but they know the hymn. You say a verse, "The Lord is my shepherd." They know the verse. They have taken the time in their youth to walk in particular ways of righteousness, so that when they are now, in this case, old old to the point of they're not seemingly able to make the conscious choices they were once able to make. What they embedded in their heart and their mind when they were younger is now coming out. And I'm picking maybe the extreme example, but that really is the basic principle at work. So we walk in righteousness now so that it will be there. If you want to be righteous in 5 years, you don't wait till five years from now to start being righteous. You start right now. Esteem the righteous elder. They are absolutely worthy of our esteem. And then work for wisdom now. I've belabored that point, so I won't repeat it anymore. But work for wisdom now. Kenneth Aitken said, "What the increasing years lose in vigor and strength, they ought to gain in experience and wisdom." I'm going to move quickly through these. I took a little bit longer on the first half than I anticipated. So the other, if you will, part 2, second lesson today. Don't sin, be happy. And Proverbs draws a direct connection between holiness and happiness. It seems like a lot of people who are outside the church, or maybe just coming up in the church, are thinking, well, holiness is just all the things you can't do. It's less happy. And that there does seem to be at times an idea, certainly the lie of Satan is you have more fun if you're less holy. All the great sins that everybody out there can do, look how much fun they're having. And what Scripture teaches, what Proverbs teaches, is that happiness, and I am actually using the word happiness instead of joy, because I want us to think about it not just in terms of that eternal and that deep, abiding delight that we have in God regardless of circumstances, but actually, genuine happiness, the momentary delights that we have, and that those are not found in sin. But the best place to find them is in holiness. And so Proverbs 16:20, "He who heeds the word wisely will find good, and whoever trusts in the Lord, happy is he." It's a developing proverb. So that he now is adding to, again, modifying. And part of this is, I think there's a little bit of synonyms between the first line and the second line. So you have heeding the word wisely. You're wisely heeding the word. And there's that is going to be more or less, I think, in the context and just in the broader biblical understanding, I would say that's more or less the same as trusting in the Lord. I think we recognize, Hebrews tells us, for example, it tells us that the children of Israel were disobedient to the word because they did not believe God. There draws a connection between unbelief and disobedience. If there's obedience, it's rooted in faith. If there's disobedience, it's rooted in unbelief. So that the promise here is, if you're obedient to the Word of God, if you're walking carefully in obedience to it, skillfully in obedience to it, good is the result. And then he says, and whoever does what? Trust who? Trusts the Lord. What does he receive? What does the one who trusts the Lord have? Happiness. He is happy. And so there's some synonymousness in the parallelism between good and happy. It's typically that which is good, we are happy to have. It brings us happiness there. And I think there's a close relation between these statements, but they're not just restating one another. He is adding to what he said in the first line. That's why it's a developing proverb here, so that let me just quickly summarize some of the principles here. True happiness is found in a right relationship with God. When we're obeying His word and trusting Him, we have this which is truly good, which makes us genuinely and righteously happy. Good comes from obedience to God. You remember when Satan tempted Adam and Eve, when Satan tempted Eve, he implied to Eve that God was withholding good from her. There's something desirable. Not just the fruit that was desirable to eat, but the knowledge to be like God that was desirable to have. And part of the temptation is that good comes from disobedience to God. Proverbs teaches exactly the opposite. We know scriptures elsewhere teaches exactly the opposite. Good comes from obedience to God. Does disobedience to God bring good? No, it brings the curse. And it brings sorrow. I would also say confidence in God, that trust in God is foundational to happiness. So if we're not trusting in the Lord, then we actually have no real basis for our happiness. But if we are trusting in the Lord, even when circumstances are bad, we still have that joy. Just switch terms here for a second. We have that joy that also can produce even happiness in those moments. Some related principles. The Word of God is to be carefully considered, diligently followed, and wisely obeyed. So we have this good that we find. It is through the wise heeding of the Word. And heeding is not just hearing, and it's not even just necessarily hearing and simply obeying, though that's obviously necessary, particularly as we think about the wisdom in heeding, this skill in obeying the Word of God. This right application of it that comes from thoughtfulness about it. So if you go back again to early on in this series, as we talked about the different words for wisdom, we not just have wisdom and the skill in living, we have the understanding, the skill in application, we have the knowledge, that experiential knowledge, we have the prudence, which is this careful internal planning. This thoughtfulness of something and working out something within my own mind before I go and do it. It's that word is sometimes used negatively as strategizes or scheming. That's that same idea, though, is that internal plotting. But instead of plotting to do bad, I plot to do evil. I work through the strategy of how am I going to do this. This is what he's talking about in this wise heeding of the word. And then the application of this, a couple things. We should understand how to apply the word. We should seek to understand how to apply the word. We should work at it. We should seek our happiness in the Lord. And we should absolutely make God the ultimate trust. I know many of these things are things that we should know well. This verse reminds us of the necessity, and it connects it to our happiness, our daily delights. And then Proverbs 17:22, a merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. This one is actually, I would say this is two different kinds of proverbs of parallels together. What kind of parallelism is present here? Okay, there's contrasting. We know this again because of the word but. What's the other one that's here? And I don't think we've really maybe only had one other example of it as we've gone through, but if I'm using figures of speech to describe something, it's illustrating there. That's what the illustrating proverbs do, is they use figures of speech in describing something. So this one is both contrasting and illustrating. So making y'all work really hard today. The first line there, let me just quickly move through this. First line, what's he talking about? What's the subject of the sentence here? A heart. What kind of heart is it? Merry heart. So they're describing the heart. And it does something. What does it do? It does good. So the merry heart is good for us. And then there is a simile. What's the simile? It does good for us in what way? It does good for us, kind of like medicine does good for us. And so that it is this I would say happiness within is beneficial to your health. It's not going to cure cancer. It's not what he's saying at all. He's not saying that, you instead of taking the antibiotics, just read a joke book. It's, again, these are Proverbs, these are general principles, number one, and this is a figure of speech. And so he's intending not to teach us, that happiness replaces medication, but rather he's showing us and illustrating the benefits of happiness is that it is good for us. But in the second line, what's the subject of that? The spirit. Is there any comparison, any relation between heart and spirit? But they're both talking about the inner man and in a sense of who we are. And so in this case, we do have to understand them as speaking about the same basic things, talking about who we are within. What kind of spirit is he talking about? A broken spirit. How would you describe, in your own words, a broken spirit? Especially in light of the first line. I would say discouraged, maybe even downcast, deeply downcast. There is an emphasis in that word. We're talking about broken spirit. It's not just momentarily sad, but there's it's crushed down. And then, what's the metaphor? Dries the bones. The picture there, at least to us, or at least to me, is strange. Because, I think dry bones, wet bones. What are we talking about here? The idea is simply it is more of a Hebrew way of thinking, ancient Hebrew way of thinking that just dry bones was indicating just poor health. But so if you were physically run down, if you were weak, exhausted, if you were sick all the time. That was just sometimes might be described or thought of as having the dryness in the bones. That you were, and you again think about where they live culturally. Where they lived, it's a very dry region, and so the lack of moisture, and they go through a period of drought, is a lack of health. It's a lack of growth, of flourishing. When lack of life. And so if they move that, you move that inward, if I don't have enough rain in my bones, if you will, there's not going to be the life and health. It's going to be shriveled and stunted and suffering. And so that seems to be the picture that's at work there, is the bones are just shriveling up, the desiccated and dry, and no life there. And so that, again, the same way that the merry heart is not replacing medication, and so a broken spirit doesn't necessarily immediately cause illness, but it does have an effect on your well-being, on your physical being. And so let me give you two quick principles here. Happiness is good for you. Really, that is part of what Proverbs is saying. It's actually good for you to be happy. The grumpy, sour people who never find pleasure in anything are better off or worse off than they could be. And a really important point, and I don't have time to delve into this today, but the really important point is the inner man does affect your outer man. So anybody ever heard the word psychosomatic? So that our thoughts affect the way we live. Now, there's limits to this, severe limits to this. I can't heal myself by thinking. But what's happening in my body absolutely affects the way I feel, and the way I feel affects what I do and how I live. So if I am short on sleep, there's going to be an emotional impact. It's going to affect my inner man. The same is true of my inner man, especially, we're talking about, in this case, things like despair. That's going to affect what you do. Though you have that point of deep discouragement, then you're many times not wanting to do much. And it limits what you do, and it actually affects your physical health. And so the inner man, who does affect our outer man, affect our physical well-being. So some of the application of this: be glad in the Lord. As we engage others, we think about how we relate to one another, encourage hearts. Do not wound them. If a broken spirit is harmful to someone, then be very careful to speak words that are not crushing, are not breaking the spirits of people. And then realize that our words do affect the spirit and well-being of others. Happiness is found in finding wisdom. And I encourage you to go back and look at these verses. There's some significant truths in this. Happiness is found in following wisdom. Happiness is found in the fear of God. Happiness is found in obedience to God's word. And the last 2 points, Proverbs 14:13, are very important to note. Happiness in this life is not without sorrow. Proverbs doesn't call us to seek unending happiness in this life. It doesn't actually teach us that it's wrong to be sad. We expect sorrow. And in part because happiness in this life is not without end. Every one of us, our life comes to an end. Therefore, our happiness is going to come to an end. There is an expiration date on our happiness, and we know from living in this life that our seasons of happiness are offset by seasons of sorrow. And so we don't expect in this life unbroken happiness. But it's still a good thing.